Continuing in the book of Deuteronomy. It's been about 2 weeks, and so we'll catch ourselves up. The book of Deuteronomy is God's second giving of the law to his people. The first generation who came out of Egypt, they stared across the Jordan River, the promised land, and they said, no, I don't think we want that. The people in there are too scary. We don't believe that God can handle it. God said, fine, you won't get it then. You will turn around and you will wander in the wilderness for 40 years until all of the adults that are among you, all those age 20 or older, which is the fighting the age you could be in the military, you're considered an adult at 20 in that time. All those people will be dead and buried in the desert. And the children who you were so concerned about of being victimized in the new land, they're the ones that will go in and inherit the land for you. So sure enough, 40 years go by, all the adults die off in the wilderness. Now it's the next generation, and they come back to the river, and they're staring across the river. And God says, all right, it's time for you to go take the land. But before you do, I want to reiterate my covenant with you, the generation who will inherit the land. And I want to reconfirm the covenant that I have with my people Israel. And I want to just to confirm all the requirements and all the obligations and all of the agreements that come along with the covenant that is between you and I. And so he gives them this book, the book of Deuteronomy. And it's actually put into a form that the people would readily recognize. It is in the form of does anybody remember the fancy word for it? It's in the form of a treaty. The treaty that a surrendering party or a surrendering nation would sign along with the conquering nation if there were to be a battle. Suzerain Vassal Treaty is the fancy name for it, where the suzerain is the winner and the vassal is the loser. And in that time, if one state or nation or city-state, whatever it was, would go against another, they'd have their war. One would finally surrender to the other, and they would draw up this type of treaty. And it had kind of this common form. It would start out with a historical prologue, a story, a background of how the two nations got to where they were. You know, this nation was here and this nation was there, and they had a battle and they fought. And here's how the winning side fought valiantly, and here's how the losing side lost. And they came together. And this is what brought us to this place. Then you have the stipulations, generally speaking, of how grand and glorious the winner is, and how submissive the loser is expected to be, and how glad they are to be serving the winner, and how all these things come together. And then the specific stipulations, the details of the agreement between the two. Usually this takes the form of the loser will pay taxes and tribute to the winner, and the winner will in turn protect and defend the loser in case they were attacked. And here's the specific, here's how much you owe us every year, and here's how you are to serve us, and here's specifically how we will protect you, and back and forth, all the specifics of the arrangement. And then after that, you also get into the sanctions. If you follow this agreement, here's all the things that will happen, but if you don't, here's what we will do to you if you break the covenant. Usually this is the winner speaking to the loser. If you rebel against us and our treaty that we are signing here today, here's what we will do to you. We'll come in and we'll burn down your towns, and we'll take all your crops, and we'll kill your kids, and that type of thing. Finally, then they go into the section of the witnesses. Here is everyone who witnesses the signing of this covenant to ratify it, that can verify and demonstrate that this is a valid covenant. And then finally, the preservation of the covenant. Here's how this is to be perpetuated through the generations to make sure that it never just is forgotten and fades away. God puts the book of Deuteronomy in the same format that they would recognize. God, of course, is the victorious party. He is the one who's brought them out of Egypt. He is the one who's provided for them in the wilderness. He's the one who's protected them from all their enemies. He's the one that's taken care of them for the last 40 years. He is the ruling party. They owe their existence to him. Israel is the defeated party, not that God has beat up on them, but they are to be submissive to God and who he is in gratitude for their existence and for their protection and their provision and all these things. These are the terms of the agreement that they will serve God with. So God will protect, he'll provide, the people submit, they serve, and they obey. And this is the type of treaty that God has set up for them in the book of Deuteronomy. So last week we covered the historical prologue, how they got to be where they are, again, how God brought them out of Egypt and crossed the Red Sea and gave them the law and protected them and all these things. Then we started into the general stipulations. We read through parts of this last week, and I really, if you want to get the true heart of this book, read along with us as we study in here. I kind of hope you are. Obviously, I can't force anybody to do this, but if you read along at home, in the books in its entirety as we go through it in a summary form in Sunday school. I think it'll be a lot more meaningful to you. But you can see the heart of where God's really come from. He encourages the people to love God and how he loves them and cares for them and how he called them out to be a people for himself and how it's really his desire to raise them up and bless them and make them prosperous and show all the world around them that this is his people. And through the way the people behave and how they're taken care of, the other nations can look at that and see what kind of God is and see how generous and kind and merciful and sovereign and orderly and law-abiding and law-giving this God is. And that was the purpose of the general stipulations. Fear God, serve him that it may go well with you. Here's how much God loves you. Here's how much he cares for you. Here's why he brought you out from among the people to serve him. The general type of guidelines that he gives. After that, we get into the specifics, the specific stipulations, the regulations. This section, we read a couple samples a couple weeks ago, but this section is containing the specific regulations for the Israelites. This makes up the bulk of the book of Deuteronomy. When you think about Deuteronomy, this is kind of what you think about, all the laws and the rules and the regulations and the thou shalt and thou shalt nots. This is what you typically think of. The laws found here cover a broad range of topics. Talks about marriage, dietary rules, tithing, festivals, courts and laws, wars, social rules, etc. It's an incredible list of regulations, not only in size, but also in the fairness, the justice, and the compassion that it includes. It truly is a unique method of government for Israel, especially in comparison to all the other violent and ruthless nations of Moses' day. This law could only have come from the loving, merciful, just, compassionate Yahweh. By agreeing to these terms, the covenant is complete. And I can't overstate, I don't think, the importance of this book. This is where Israel signs on the dotted line, says, yes, we will be your people. We will submit and obey to you. We agree to you. We surrender to you. We accept the terms of our surrender to you. You will be our leader, and we will abide by what you say. This is where they sign this contract. This is the binding contract between the suzerain Yahweh and the vassal Israel. And we read just a couple examples last week. Just for fun, let's read a couple examples more. We talked about requirements for going to the temple. We talked about how the people are to come to the temple so often to worship with him. It goes on to provisions for the priests and the Levites, legal decisions. Let's turn to chapter 19 if you're following along. Chapter 19 of chapter 19 of Deuteronomy. Pick it up in verse 15. Again, just to give kind of a flavor of the types of laws and regulations that we see here. It says, a single witness, this is verse 15 of chapter 19, a single witness shall not suffice against a person for any crime or for any wrongdoing in connection with an offense that he has committed. Only the evidence of 2 witnesses or 3 witnesses shall charge be established. Why do you think God would say that? You cannot bring charges against anybody in court based on only one person's testimony. You have to have at least 2 or 3 to bring charges against somebody in court of law. Now let's think about this. Why would that be? Why is it so important? So that you don't constantly have false charges being brought up against people in court, right? You have to have at least 2 or 3 who can all agree on what they saw before you bring charges against anybody. What was the term I heard on the radio not too long ago? We're starting to see this in politics quite a bit, unfortunately, in our country. I think I heard it called lawfare. Has anybody else heard that term? I just heard that a couple weeks ago on the radio. They were talking about a news report where the law is no longer being used as a defense mechanism, in other words, to stop the bad guy and protect the good guy. It's used by the bad guy to attack the good guy by finding some loophole or legal manipulation or just flat out false charges where you take them to court. They have to spend exorbitant amounts of money in their own defense. They can probably go broke unless you're Donald Trump or something like that who has plenty of money. But you bring these charges against the person, they either go broke trying to defend themselves and or their reputation is totally demolished in the public opinion. And even if they're found not guilty in the end, because your testimony is false, by the time they're found not guilty, the damage is already done. They've already lost a substantial part of their fortune, their testimony, or their reputation in society is ruined, and that's even if they're found not guilty. Now, if you have a corrupt or incompetent judge or jury or whatever that finds them guilty despite the evidence, then it's even worse. Now they're suffering for what they have not done. So God clear back in Deuteronomy says this is not okay. He says you have to have at least 2 or 3 witnesses in your prosecution before you are allowed to bring anybody to court. Continue on, verse 16. It says, if a malicious witness, a false witness, somebody who's just trying to take somebody down, arises to accuse a person of wrongdoing, then both parties to this dispute shall appear before the Lord, before the priests and the judges who are in the office in those days. The judges shall inquire diligently, and if the witness is a false witness and has accused his brother falsely, if the guy is found innocent and it's found that the accuser is doing so just to take down an innocent person, verse 19, then you shall do to him as he had meant to do to his brother. Oh, there's a fun twist. Verse 20. I'm sorry, the end of verse 19. So shall you purge the evil from your midst, and the rest shall hear and fear, and shall never again commit any such evil among you. Your eye shall not pity. It shall be life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, and foot for foot. What does he say here? First of all, how many of you recognize these phrases here that are sometimes quoted by non-Bible-believing people? An eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, life for life, whatever. And people who don't understand the Bible often use it in the context of what? Personal revenge. You hurt me, I'm going to hurt you. If you break my arm, I'm going to come break your arm. If you wreck my car, I'm going to come wreck your car. Life for life, an eye for an eye, tooth for tooth. And you Bible believers, you believe this because it's in your Bible. Is it in the Bible? Is it? Kind of, isn't it? Those words are in the Bible, but it's not in personal revenge context at all. God never says if somebody hurts you, you turn around and take vengeance for yourself and take an eye for an eye, tooth for tooth, and a car for a car. He does not say that. Okay? That is not what it's about at all. In this context here, it's in the context of what? If you falsely bring somebody to court and you are maliciously accusing them of something in court with the intent of bringing them down, but they are an innocent person and you are actually the bad guy, then the court should say, aha, this guy is innocent. You, prosecution, are guilty of bringing them to court maliciously. Therefore, what you wanted to have done to them, now that's your sentence. How would that revolutionize our legal system today, do you think? If you take somebody to court and you're falsely accusing them, whatever kind of penalty they would have gotten, 5, 10, 15 years in prison, $20, $30, $40,000 in fines, whatever it is, whatever you're trying to get punished upon them, that will now be your punishment for bringing them to court falsely. This is not personal vengeance at all. This is absolutely within the legal system. In fact, God says, don't take vengeance personally, doesn't he? What does he say? Vengeance is mine. I will repay, says God. If there's something going on, you are not to take personal vengeance. This is not vigilante system. That is not God's system at all. He says, do it within the legal system, which at this time also included the priests and the Levites and the worship system as well. This was a theocracy. But he says if you start having people bringing people falsely to court, whatever they were trying to get, whatever kind of punishment they were trying to sanction on this guy, they themselves receive. That would revolutionize our legal system, would it not? Not a bad way to do it. That's not the only time this phrase is used. It's also used in Numbers and there was one other time, sorry. But anyway, none of the times does it refer to personal vengeance or personal, revenge in that way. Eye for an eye, tooth for tooth. It never refers to that. Carrying on, chapter 20 talks about rules of warfare, how you are to treat your enemies, what treaties you are and are not supposed to make with your enemies. Verse 19 of chapter 20 says, when you besiege a city for a long time, get a load of this. When you besiege a city for a long time, which is when you attack a city, all the people run and hide in the city has big walls, it's hard to fight against them because they're in the city, they're hiding in there, and so usually what the army would do is surround the city and not allow any supplies to go in or out. Eventually the people inside will run out of food or water, they will get weak, and they will either surrender or they'll become too weak to fight, and then you can attack them and easily take them over. That's what a siege is. So it says, chapter 20, verse 19, when you besiege a city for a long time, making war against it in order to take it, you shall not destroy its trees by wielding an axe against them. You may eat from them, but you shall not cut them down. You're not allowed to cut down the trees around a besieged city. He says, are the trees in the field human, that they should be besieged by you? Are you attacking the trees there? No, you're attacking the people, so don't cut down all the trees. Verse 20, only the trees that you know are not trees for food you may destroy and cut down, that you may build siege works against the city that makes war with you until it falls. So if you are an army and you're going against an enemy city and you're besieging it, all of the fruit trees around the city you are not allowed to cut down. Now, the oaks and the maples and stuff like that don't produce fruit and you don't eat from them, those you can cut down and build your catapults or battering rams or whatever it is you need to build. You can cut that stuff down. But the fruit trees or nut trees or whatever that produce food to eat from, you are not allowed to cut down. I wish we were up in room 400 and could just banter this back and forth for a while a little bit better. This is a fun one. Why do you think that would be? It doesn't explicitly say in here why that is. I think God kind of leaves it up to us at this point, putting ourselves in the shoes of the people back then to figure out why. Why do you think that would be? Non-fruit or non-nut trees, non-food producing trees you can cut down, but the food-producing trees you are commanded by God to leave up. You're not allowed to cut those down. Maybe once the war is over, it's more humanitarian and the people who are surviving can still have a source of food, maybe. Maybe he's showing here discrimination where you're not just going in and clear-cutting everything and destroying entire populations for generations and generations, because those trees will take a while to come back, and so people need sustenance, and so you're supposed to show compassion in that way. I'm kind of speculating a little bit here. That'd probably be my guess. Anybody have a guess they want to venture? Strength of the wood, maybe. Maybe he just knows that the apple and pear trees don't make that great of battering rams. Maybe. Possibly. I don't know. I'll leave that to your discretion. You can study that on your own. Continuing on. Chapter 21, atonement for unsolved murders. It talks about the treatment of captives that you take from the other peoples, inheritance rights, on and on it goes. Chapter 22. Take a look at this. Chapter 22, verse 6. It says, if you come across a bird's nest in any tree or on the ground with the young ones or eggs and the mother sitting on the young or on the eggs, you shall not take the mother with the young. You shall let the mother go, but the young you may take for yourself, that it may go well with you and that you may live long. If you come across a bird's nest and you're looking for a snack or whatever, there's the eggs and there's the mama. You can take the eggs and have an omelet, but you're not allowed to hurt mama bird. One or the other. You're not allowed to kill off both generations of bird at the same time. That's odd. Why do you think that would be? I have a feeling here that this meaning goes deeper than just the birds. I think it reflects you are to consider the consequences of your actions and the long-term compassion on the things you do, the long-term consequence. Taking mama and bird wipes out that whole birdie family. And again, I have a feeling that they're supposed to learn an object lesson from the birds. I need to be careful of what I do because the repercussions and the damage that I can cause to other people also can be long-term, and I need to really, really think about the implications of what I do. That's kind of my opinion on that one. Verse 8, he continues. How about this one? Chapter 22, verse 8. When you build a new house, you shall make a parapet for your roof. That is a kind of a handrail, a guardrail around the roof, that you may not bring the guilt of blood upon your house if anyone should fall from it. Back then, of course, people would go up on the roof. That was an additional living space. They could go up there and, kind of be out of the hot and the heat of the day and go up in there in the evening and stuff. But if you have a roof where there's stairs going up there and you can go up to the roof, you're required to build a hand railing around it so that if somebody slips and falls off your roof, so people don't slip and fall off your roof, I should say, and therefore you are not guilty for another person's injury if they fall off of your roof. Again, interesting. Why? Why would God mandate this upon his people? This is a direct command from the all-powerful universe, the creator of the universe. It says, you shall build a handrail around your roof so that people don't fall off your roof, and so that you will be innocent of their well-being. Again, why? And does this just have to do with handrails, or are we supposed to learn something a greater lesson here that we're supposed to learn through the handrails? I think probably a greater lesson. We need to be thoughtful and conscientious of other people and their safety, and take responsibility for our part of other people's welfare as far as we can do. Now, we can't stop everything. We can't stop a moron from being a moron, and I understand that. And if you have a 2-foot deep swimming pool and they decide to do a swan dive into the pool and they hurt themselves, you're stupid, I'm sorry. But we need to do what we reasonably can as far as we can to care for other people. How about this one? Verse 9, the very next verse. You shall not sow your vineyard with 2 kinds of seed, lest the whole yield be forfeited, the crop that you have sown and the yield of a vineyard. Or, verse 10, you shall not plow with an ox and a donkey together. Or, verse 11, you shall not wear a cloth of wool and linen mixed together. You can't plant 2 kinds of seed. You can't plow with 2 different kinds of animals. And you can't wear clothes made of 2 different types of fabric. Just for fun, I checked the tag on my shirt this morning as I was putting it on, this lavenderish purpley one. You know what I have? 55% cotton, 45% polyester, just in case you were wondering. Okay? Wives, if later on, right now, if you want to check the tags on your husband's shirt, or husbands, if you want to check the tag on your wife's shirt, maybe not now, maybe that's a thing for later, check and see what your tags say. We are violating a direct command from the all-powerful Yahweh by wearing linen, or in this case, polyester and cotton. You lawbreakers, you. Why? Why? What's wrong with wearing a shirt made of 2 kinds of fabric? Or planting 2 different kinds of seeds in your vineyard? Or even maybe plowing with 2 different kinds of animals. Now, an oxen and a donkey, maybe I can see that because they kind of just go around in circles because the oxen's way stronger. That'd be kind of goofy. But why? He's teaching us something here about mixing 2 things together that don't belong. The concept of staying separate and staying, can we use the word pure, I guess? I almost hate to bring that in because it has so many connotations. But remaining separate, not mixing 2 things that maybe don't belong together. What are we supposed to see from this? The people are supposed to stay separate from their surroundings as well, and stay dedicated to God. We're not supposed to mix maybe the pagan idolatry and the holy worship of the true God. Maybe we're supposed to see in this a picture of separation and dedication in what we do. And even though maybe the clothes and the fabric in and of themselves aren't that important, maybe that's not the real point. Maybe the point is we're supposed to see a larger concept, an object lesson here of separation and purity and dedication to God, one or the other. Either you're on His side or you're not on His side. But we're not going to do mixing and matching, which, by the way, is exactly what got Israel in trouble later on, isn't it? Most of the time when they turned to idolatry, it wasn't just turning away from God and now we're going to completely follow the idols. It was oftentimes a mixing and matching. In fact, towards the end, just before the exile, we see the pagan temple, or the pagan altars being erected right in the middle of what? God's temple area. Here's God's altar in the temple area, and right next to it is a pagan altar and an Asherah pole and all these other pagan shrines we see, and they're mixing and matching, and they're going to God for advice, and then they're turning to the other idols to make their sacrifices, and it's just a mixed match. And it takes God's name and it equates Him with all the other pagan idols as if the 2 were equal in some way, or one is as good as the other, and we might as well just pull them all together and just make our own little homemade brew of worship and idolatry. And God says, that's not it at all. I am completely different from these other guys. I am separate. You are not to mix my worship with their worship because we are not the same. And I don't want you to do anything that even suggests that we are on the same level, me and Molech, or me and Asherah, or me and the Baals, whoever. I am above all those things. And so as an object lesson, I always want you to wear clothes made of one kind of cloth or the other, but we are not going to mix. Or your vineyard, you're to plant this kind of crop or that kind of crop, but we're not going to mix, because things are to be kept separate. And even though I don't care so much about the cloth and the grapes per se, I want this to be an object lesson for you forever. Verse 12, you shall make for yourself tassels on the 4 corners of the garment with which you cover yourself. So every time you make a cloak, And you go to Walmart and you buy yourself a new cloak, it better have a tassel on all the corners. How many of you have tassels on the corners of your clothes today? If so, stand up. I want to see them. The Orthodox Jews, some of them will still do that to this day. They do. Again, what's the point? This is a statement of some kind. Honestly, I don't know off the top of my head. I'd have to look into it and read it, and I didn't this week. But all these different laws that he's giving, some of these laws are blatantly obvious common sense. Some of them are very wise things that we realize the wisdom as we think about them more and more. And some of them just sound on the surface to be downright goofy, like some of these ones that we just read, and yet God has a lesson to teach the people through them. It continues on, chapter 22, laws about sexual immorality, assembly of the people, more miscellaneous laws, cleanness within the camp, laws concerning divorce and marriage and that type of thing. Skip on to chapter 24. How about this one? Chapter 24, verse 19. When you reap your harvest in your field and forget a sheaf in the field, oops, I came in from the barn and now I look back and there's a sheaf, I somehow missed it. He says, if you do that, you shall not go back to get it. It shall be for the sojourner. What is a sojourner? A traveler, somebody who's walking from one place to another. There is no McDonald's, okay, there's no Burger King or Dairy Queen or anything like that. They have to find food along the way somewhere. And he says, if you leave a sheaf of wheat out in the field by mistake, you are not allowed to turn around and go get it and say, oops, I just forgot this. You have to leave it there so that people traveling through have a source of food to eat. This is a way you show compassion on your fellow Israelites. It shall be for the sojourner, for the fatherless, that's the orphan, and the widow, that the Lord your God may bless you in all the work of your hands. How about this, verse 20? When you beat your olive trees, and you're shaking down all the olives out of it at harvest time, you shall not go over them again. It shall be for the sojourner, the fatherless, and the widow. Or, verse 21, when you gather the grapes of your vineyard, you shall not strip it afterwards. In other words, you go through once, you pick all your grapes, you come in, but inevitably you're going to miss some. I have about 3 grapevines at our house, and so it's not like I have a huge laborious task of combing through the vineyards. But even still, those grape leaves get big. Inevitably, I always, after I pick my grapes, and my wife makes some grape juice and stuff out of them, non-fermented, don't worry. And she goes through it. She makes the grape juice. But every time I pick, I always go back later, and you look at the vines from a different angle, and there's some more grapes you missed. I guarantee it, just because those leaves are big, those little grapes somehow hide up under there, and they just get missed. They just do. And God says, after you go through the first time, and you're taking just a stroll through the vineyard after the harvest, and you look, and there's another grape I missed. There's a bunch of grapes over there. There's a cluster of grapes over there. I missed them. You are not allowed to go through and pick those grapes. You are not allowed to. That is for the sojourner, for the orphans, and for the widows, to take care of them. This is the way that you show compassion upon your fellow Israelites. And not just that, but you're to show compassion in other ways too. But symbolically, this is one way you are required to do that. It says, it shall be for the sojourner, the fatherless, and the widow. Verse 22, you shall remember that you were also a slave in the land of Egypt. Therefore I command you to do this. You are to be considerate and have compassion upon other people. That is a requirement of you from me, says God. This is part of our contract, our suzerain vassal treaty. I order you to do this. You are to take care of others in this way. Continue on in chapter 25. Look at verse 4. Here's one. You shall not muzzle an ox when it is treading out the grain. If you have an ox and you got a great big grain mill there and he's tied onto the millstone, you've seen the pictures or movies or whatever, and they're walking around in a circle and they're spinning this great big millstone there and it's grinding down the grain into flour. He says, you are not allowed to put a muzzle on that ox as he treads out the grain. You're not allowed to do it. But if you don't, that ox is going to do what? He's going to stop for a snack, isn't he? You can't ask an ox to walk through knee-deep grain all the time and not stop for a snack sometimes. He's going to get hungry. But he says, you are not allowed to put a muzzle on him. You must allow him to eat some of the grain that he is grinding. Why? This one's easier to answer, isn't it? Because this verse shows up again in the New Testament. Romans chapter, I think it's 12. I think it is. I thought I wrote it down, maybe not. Anyway, somewhere in the New Testament, Paul says, the law says don't muzzle the ox when he's treading out the grain. And then he says, do you think it's only for the ox that God wrote this? No, he says this is for the people too. And in context, he's talking about, does anybody remember off the top of your head? The workman is worthy of his reward. If somebody devotes all their time in preaching and preparing the word and pastoring a church, he says they are worthy of the reward that comes along with that. They should have their payment. And then he references this verse in his instruction in the New Testament. He says, the workman is worthy of his reward, the preacher is worthy of his payment for what he does, and he says, doesn't even the law say, you shall not muzzle the ox that treads out the corn? He says, if you put in the work, you deserve the reward that comes from that work. So that's kind of a freebie, isn't it? God interprets that one for us. So that's a good one. All right, I want to keep going here. I'd really like to get through Deuteronomy today. He continues on with more instruction. God continues this section of his treaty with one final admonition. At the very end of this section, he gives this passage. And I want to read this because I think it really sums up the whole purpose for this. Chapter 26, verses 16 through 19. He says, this day the Lord your God commands you to do these statutes and rules. All the last 10 or whatever, 12, 14 chapters of rules and regulations, he says, he commands you to do these things. He says, you shall therefore be careful to do them with all your heart and with all of your soul. You have declared today that the Lord is your God, and that you will walk in his ways and keep his statutes and his commandments and his rules and will obey his voice. He says, you are agreeing to the terms of the surrender to your God this day. Verse 18, and the Lord has declared today that you are a people for his treasured possession, as he has promised you, and that you are to keep all of his commandments, and that he will set you in praise and in fame and in honor high above all the nations that he has made, and that you shall be a people holy to the Lord your God, as he has promised. Did you catch the ending of this section of the treaty? It's got both parts, isn't it? It says you are required to obey his commands and his statutes and his laws. That is your job. You are obligated to obey what he says. But then he says in verse 18 and 19, he says, but he has also declared that he will bring you out as a treasured possession. He's promised you. He will set you in praise and fame and high honor above all the nations he's made. This is my obligation to you. This is my promise to you. You will obey me, follow me, and honor me, and I will bless and protect and provide for you, and I will make you a special people such that the world has never, ever seen. You will be so amazing because you are my chosen people. This is the heart of the covenant I'm setting for you today. You're signing on the dotted line. You are agreeing to these terms of surrender. I will do this for you, and you are required to obey me. This is the contract, he says. And with that, kind of the contract is done. Now, not exactly, but those are the ends of the terms of the agreement. Now we move on. The next section is the sanctions. That is, what happens if we obey and what happens if we disobey. We better set these things in place so there are no surprises. He wants everything out on the table. So in chapter 27, and really chapters 27 and 28, talks about the blessings and the cursings. And later on throughout the law in the Old Testament and even the New Testament, when it talks about, he says, God will bring upon you all of the cursings written in the book for disobedience, because unfortunately that's the side that the nation fell on most of the time. He says when he talks about the cursings listed in the book, what he's referring to is back here to Deuteronomy 28 specifically. Okay? So in chapter 27, Moses tells the people, now you're going to cross over the river into the land, and as soon as you get over there, I am ordering you to do this. He says there are two mountains on the other side. There's Mount Gerizim and there's Mount Ebal. And he says, I want you to find these two mountains and arrange yourself on these mountains. Chapter 27, verse 9. I want to read this to you. He says, then Moses and the Levitical priests said to all Israel, keep silence and hear, O Israel. This day you have become the people of the Lord your God. You have just signed the covenant contract. That makes you God's people from this day on. Verse 10, you shall therefore obey the voice of the Lord your God, keeping his commandments and his statutes which I command you today. That day Moses charged the people, saying, when you have crossed over the Jordan, these shall stand on Mount Gerizim to bless the people. Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Joseph, and Benjamin. And these shall stand on Mount Ebal for the curse. Reuben, Gad, Asher, Zebulun, Dan, and Naphtali. And the Levites shall declare to all the men of Israel in a loud voice, and it lists a whole bunch of curses for disobedience there. But he says, when you go across the land, or across the river, into the promised land, the first thing you do is you arrange yourself on these mountains. And these tribes you go up on this mountain, and those tribes you go up on this mountain. And you are to shout back and forth the blessings and the cursings. Blessings for obedience, cursings for disobedience. And you can imagine probably 2 to 3 million people arranged on these two mountains with a valley in between, shouting back and forth the blessings and the cursings for obedience. Here's what God will do for you if you obey. Here's what God will do to you if you disobey. Back and forth, probably reciting what is in chapters 27 and 28 for the blessing and the cursing. In fact, I've put up here a picture. I looked up a picture of Mount Gerizim and Ebal. I'm assuming these are still the same ones that Moses would have been referring to. Here's a picture of them. You can see them. And so God says, I want half the tribes to stand on the one face of the one mountain and half on the other. And you can kind of see that there's a sharp little valley right there in the middle. And you can imagine 1 million plus people on either side crowding up on the slopes of this mountain, shouting and echoing and quoting back the books of Moses, the blessing and the cursing for obedience. If you obey God, here's what he will do for you. And the other tribes respond with echoing thunder. Here's what God will do if you disobey him. Back and forth, echoing massive amounts of volume back and forth to the people as they answer and reply to themselves. Here's the reward for obedience. Here's the curse for disobedience. In chapter 28, here's some of the things he said. I don't have time to read all of it to you. Pick it up in verse 3, chapter 28. He says, Blessed shall you be in the city, and blessed shall you be in the field. This is what Mount Gerizim is shouting to Mount Ebal, okay, across the valley. Blessed shall be the fruit of your womb, and the fruit of your ground, and the fruit of your cattle, the increase of your herds, and of the young of your flock. Verse 5, Blessed shall be your basket and your kneading bowl. Blessed shall be you when you come in, and blessed shall be when you go out. The Lord will cause your enemies who rise against you to be defeated before you, and they shall come out against you one way and flee before you 7 ways. The Lord will command the blessing on you in your barns and in all that you undertake, and he will bless you in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. Continue in verse 11. And the Lord will make you abound in prosperity, in the fruit of your womb, and in the fruit of your livestock, and in the fruit of your ground, within the land that the Lord swore to your fathers to give you. The Lord will open to you his good treasury, the heavens, to give the rain unto your land in its season, and to bless the work of your hands. And you shall lend to many nations, but you shall not borrow. And the Lord will make you the head and not the tail, and you shall only go up and not down, if you obey the commands of the Lord your God, which I command you today, being careful to do them. And if you do not turn aside from any of the words that I command you today, to the right hand or to the left, to go after the other gods and serve them. Can you imagine 1 million plus people shouting these blessings across the valley, echoing back and forth against the cliff faces, blessing from God, blessing from God, blessing from God. And then Mount Ebal chimes in, and Mount Ebal says this, But, verse 15, if you will not obey the voice of the Lord your God, or be careful to do all of his commandments or his statutes that I command you today, then all these curses shall come upon you and overtake you. Cursed shall be you in the city, cursed shall you be in the field, cursed shall be your basket and your kneading bowl. Cursed shall be the fruit of your womb and the fruit of your ground, and the increase of your herds and of the young of your flock. Cursed shall you be when you come in, and cursed shall be when you go out. And he continues the rest of the chapter, enunciating and expounding upon the curses that God will bring for disobedience, and for all the power and majesty that God puts into the blessing for obedience. He directs all that majesty and power into cursing the people and bringing them down if they disobey and turn to other gods. Back and forth across the canyon, they echo these promises from God. Verse 52, They shall besiege you in all your towns until your high and fortified walls in which you trusted come down. And they shall besiege you in all your towns throughout your land. Verse 53, You shall eat the fruit of your womb, the flesh of your sons and daughters. You'll be so starved, you'll be so emaciated, you'll start eating your own children, he says, whom the Lord your God has given you in the siege and in the distress with which your enemies shall distress you. The man who is the most tender and refined among you will begrudge food to his brother, to his wife he embraces, and to the last of the children whom he has left. Why the children he has left? Because all the others he has already eaten. Yeah. To the last of the children he has left, so that he will not give to any of them any of the flesh of his children whom he is eating, because he has nothing else left in the siege and in the distress with which your enemies shall distress you in all your towns. This is difficult, gritty, disgusting language, and it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be uncomfortable. I see a couple of you out there going, ugh, facially. That's exactly what you're supposed to do. This is what will happen to you if you disobey God and disregard his commands. You have signed the contract, and if you go back on the contract, this is what your suzerain God will bring upon you. He will destroy you. He'll destroy your towns. He'll destroy your livestock. He'll destroy everything you have until you're so impoverished and disease-ridden you'll end up eating your own children. It will be unimaginable how bad things will be for you if you disobey. Whew. Ugly stuff. Man, we got to keep flying. I'm sorry. After this section, there are witnesses to the contract. Every contract has to be notarized and signed by witnesses, or witnessed by people. And sure enough, God in this chapters, brings up some witnesses. Chapter 29, verse 1. These are the words of the covenant that the Lord commanded Moses to make with the people of Israel in the land of Moab. Verse 2, and Moses summoned all Israel and said to them, you have seen all that the Lord did before your eyes in the land of Egypt to Pharaoh and to all of his servants to this land, and the great trials that your eyes saw, and the signs and those great wonders. He says, he continues on citing all the miracles. He says, I've led you 40 years in the wilderness. Your clothes haven't worn out. Your sandals haven't worn out. I've provided you drink and bread and the manna and all that kind of stuff. I am the Lord your God. Verse 9, therefore keep the words of this covenant and do them, that you may prosper in all you do. He calls their own eyes as witnesses. He talks about God's miracles. He talks about God and the Israelite leaders in verses 9 through 15. He lists them all there. Verse 10, you're standing today, all of you, before the Lord your God, the head of your tribes, your elders, your officers, all the men of Israel, your little ones, your wives, the sojourners in your camp, from the one who chops wood to the one who draws water, so that you may enter into the sworn covenant of the Lord your God, which the Lord your God is making with you this day, that he may establish you today as his people, that he may be your God, as he promised you, as he swore to your fathers. All of you people are witness to this. You've seen what I've done. You've seen the terms of the arrangement. You've all agreed that I will be your God. You are all entering into this with open eyes. You know what you're doing. He continues in verse 22. The next generation, your children who will rise up after you, and the foreigner who comes from afar in the land, when they see the afflictions of the land and the sickness, all the things that God will bring about if you disobey, they'll all see this, and they'll all be witness to the punishments that God will bring if you disobey. Finally, heaven and earth themselves are a witness in verse 19 and 20 as well. He says, heaven and earth are all witness to this contract that we are setting up today. Whew. Finally, he does set up a preservation of the covenant. How do we perpetuate this throughout the years? Verse 9 through 13 says, then Moses wrote this law and gave it to the priests, the sons of Levi, who carried the ark of the covenant of the Lord, and to all the elders of Israel. Moses commanded them, he said, at the end of every 7 years, at the time set in the year of the release, that's the Sabbath year that he gave, at the feast of booths, when all Israel comes to appear before the Lord your God at the place that he will choose, you shall read this law before all of Israel in their hearing. Assemble the people, the men, the women, the little ones, the sojourners within your towns, that they may hear and learn to fear the Lord your God, and be careful to do all the words of this law, and that their children who have not known it may hear and learn to fear the Lord your God as long as you live in the land that you are going over the Jordan to possess. He says every 7 years when you're required to come before the Lord at the temple, you are required to read this entire law. Probably the book of Deuteronomy is what he's referring to here. The entirety of the law, all the laws, all the regulations, all the admonitions, all the blessings, all the curses, everything, so that you never forget. This must never be forgotten as long as you live, generation after generation after generation, so that they don't turn away from the law, and so they remember to keep all the words that I'm giving to you this day. That's how this law will be perpetuated throughout the generations. There's a little bit left. The clock is against me. We'll finish up the last couple chapters next week, but we will also move into the next book of Joshua, the next book of the saga. Let's pray and we'll dismiss. Dear God, we thank you this morning for this book that you've given us to read, the covenant with your people. And it reflects what an amazing God you are, the righteousness, the justice that you have, the compassion that you show, and that you demand that your people show upon each other. But it also shows your holiness, blessing if they keep up their end of the deal, but cursing if they do not, because you're not a casual God. This isn't just a lax and informal handshake and agreement. This is the covenant between you and your people. You kept your word. You blessed them when they obeyed, but they are the ones that broke it. And we see so much of ourselves in them as well. I just pray that we see who you are through all these laws and regulations and this covenant that you made. In Jesus' name I pray, amen. All right, next week we finish out Deuteronomy and enter the book of Joshua.